have a little Drasha on Sunday from Megillah. It's a little bit, it's not so complicated, but feel free to like ask questions or be like, can you repeat that if you're not following or if you have a question. It's not like so pashut, but you guys should come. Okay. And first I want to thank Hashem for bringing us all here today and giving us life every day, allowing us to finish Masechtas and accomplish various things. And I would like to thank my wife for always being an amazing wife and enabling my Torah learning, and none of this would ever happen. I wouldn't even be in Israel right now learning if it wasn't for her. And to thank Ezra for steiging through this Masechta with me. And to thank everyone for coming. The Gemara says in Megillah Tet Vav Amud Aleph that anyone who says Dvar Torah and says through the name of who he heard it from brings Geula to the world. So I'm about to say Dvar Torah B'Shem Rabbi Bernstein. So hopefully through me saying that, Geula will come to the world. This was a shir Rabbi Bernstein. This is a shir Rabbi Bernstein gave to us in our first year. So I'm not sure if he gives the same shirs every year. Maybe all of you guys have heard this before, so just pretend you didn't. And if you didn't hear it before, then it'll be Geshmak. But this is all Rabbi Bernstein. So first of all, just to give a background to this Dvar Torah, is that there are 22 letters in the Aleph base, and 5 of those letters change form. By the way, this Drasha has nothing to do with form. So there's 5 letters that change form when those letters are at the end of the word. And when in the middle of the word, they have a different form, right? Those letters, the Gemara refers to by an acronym as Mansapah, which is Mem, which has a different form at the end of the word, right? The closed form is opposed to the open form. The Nun, which is like the Nun and then straight down. The Tzadi, changes form at the end. The Pei and the Chaf. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. Why do we have 5 letters that suddenly change form at the end of the word? Like Meichatesi, where is this coming from? Why are we doing this? Why these 5? What is this idea of Sophie letters? So by the end of this drasha, you'll know exactly what's the deal. Did Rabbi Bernstein give you guys a share? No? Okay, great. So, what's that?
We never heard it.
Nice. Well done. Okay.
I can assure you I never heard it.
Great. So the Gemara says in Daf Beis, Amud Beis, that Am Rabbi Yirmiyah v'Yitema Rabbi Chia bar Abba Menatzbach Sofin Amarim. He says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, Menatzbach, these 5 Sophie letters, Sofin Amarim, that Sophim, Litzbot, Sophia means to scope out, to see, and Sophim here referred to the prophets, the Nevi'im. So they are the ones that said it, they instituted it. Right? Where did this come from? The prophets, they instituted that these 5 letters should change form at the end of the word. The Gemara asks 2 kasha on this. Tizbra, does that really make sense? V'hagsiv, Ela mitzvahs, shein navi rashai lechadish davar me'ata. What do you mean? The pasuk says in Bamidbar, Ela mitzvahs, these are the mitzvahs, no more. A navi cannot come along in the chadash mitzvah. How is it possible that the Nevi'im and Sofim can come along and say, from now on, these 5 letters at the end of the word, they're going to be a Sof letter. They can't do it. It's against the Torah. So that's the first kasha the Gemara asks. The second one is V'od v'amar Rav Chisda mem v'samech shebeluchos b'neis hayomdim. There's a tradition that if you look through all of the letters of the Aleph base and the Sophie letters, the only letters that are closed are the Mem Sophit and the Samech. So the tradition says that when the luchos were carved in through the tablets all the way through, so if a samech is carved all the way through a tablet, the middle piece of the samech wouldn't just fall down. So it's saying it was a nace that it stood in its place in midair. Does that make sense? All the other letters are open letters, such that if you carve it into the tablet, it has what to hold on to except for the mem sofit and the samech. So now, what's the kasha? So if you have a tradition that by Matan Torah, by the luchos, the mem sofit is holding in midair, how could you say 500 years later, wherever the Nevi'im came and instituted that there should be a mem sofit, implying before there was no mem sofit? What about this tradition that the mem sofit hung in midair? Two good kashas right on this statement. So the Gemara has an attempt to solve, and it says, okay, so maybe really we had the letters, we had the sofit letters in the middle letters, and the Nevi'im just came along and said, we don't know which one's in the middle, which one's at the end. We're going to make the middle one the middle type, the middle mem like the middle one, and we're going to make that the end. So really they were both around, and they just instituted that it should be the end to the middle. The Gemara has a problem with that and says, what do you mean? Elu mitzvahs. Again, you're machadish something. You can't do that. If you're saying it wasn't like that before, now it is. The Nevi'im are again coming along and instituting it. So you can't do that. So really the Gemara's final maskana is that Ela Shikchum v'chazru v'yisam. That really they had it like this. The people forgot that like these letters were the final letters, and the Nevi'im came back and they were mataken. These letters should again be the final ones, and that's the entire Gemara. And then it moves on to something else. So it's a Geshmak Gemara, but however there are some glaring problems with it. So the first main problem is, okay, so the Gemara says, really it used to be that they had the middle letters and the final letters, and then they just forgot, and then they brought it back. What do you mean by they forgot? Just open up any Torah, any Sefer Torah, any mezuzah, anything. It has to take a nationwide conspiracy to suddenly just forget that these letters are the end of every single word, and then all of a sudden just be like, oh yeah, like we're going to bring it back. Like, what is this they forgot and they brought it back? Like, how is that possible? How could that ever be possible? Like, logistically, it makes no sense. Secondly, which is just more of a side question, is why does the Gemara say Sophie? Usually the usual word for a prophet is a Navi. Why does it say Nevi'im, Natzbach Nevi'im Amr? Why does it say Sophie? That's also like a little hint. Right, so those are our kashas on the table. The first one probably being in the middle, maybe a little more Shema kasha. But like, how's it possible they forgot and they brought it back? So Rabbi Bernstein brings a long teretz, I'll explain, by Rav Eliyahu Gutmacher, who's a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, who was born in Poland in 1796. He's a big Gaon. And so he gives a very geshmak teretz to this kasha. So he basically says as follows. He says, there's no such thing as middle letters and final letters. It's not like this type of mem, the open form goes in the middle of the word and the closed form goes to the final. Rather, what it really is that each type of letter represents, that letter should be like that consistently throughout. Meaning, if we're in a certain era, either you're using the Sophie letters all the time, in the middle of the word and the end of the word, or you're using the open type of letters all the time. So keeping that in mind, he says that the aleph base are sort of like the periodic table of elements. That just like the whole world is made up of, the physical world is made up of atoms, of a set number of atoms, so too, the aleph base sort of represent in a Kabbalistic sense, like the makeup of the world, right? The Gemara Brachos, the Tzalel, talking in Mishkan, just basically talks about how he knew, it's sort of a reference that like the aleph, he talks about the aleph base being like sort of the makeup of the world in terms of like the elements of everything that makes up the world. So the world, so depending on how the world is going to depend on if we're using Sophie letters or middle letters. So before the Chet of Adam Harishon, the world was very different in nature than it was today. And after Adam Harishon did the Chet, the world changed in its very nature. And there were 5 changes that happened in the nature of the world, and those 5 changes were represented by the 5 letters that changed form. Meaning, before the Chet HaAdam Rishon, when you looked at the aleph base, it was only the final letters. These are the higher level of the letters. And then after the Chet, the world dropped to a lower madrika, and that was reflected in the letters themselves going all to the open type letters. So you never had a mem sofit at the end of a word after post Adam Chet Adam Rishon. You only had the open letters at both the beginning, the middle of the word, and the end of the world, and the end of the word. And we'll have to see later how we got to the current matzav. So how we got to the current matzav, where we have the open letters in the middle and the closed at the end, that was established later, which we'll get to later. But originally, we'll say pre-Matan Torah, pre-Chet Adam Rishon, it only had the Sophie letters. Post-Chet Adam Rishon, it only had the open letters. So now, there were 5 changes that happened when Adam sinned. Number 1 was death was introduced in the world. Before Adam sinned, there's no such thing as death. After Adam sinned, the pasuk says, right, that people now die. There's a chiddush in the world. That's represented by the word mem. That mem stands for misa. So before the Chet of Adam Rishon, the mem was an open mem because you lived forever. After the Chet of Adam Rishon, the mem was closed. Exact opposite. Before the Chet of Adam Rishon, it was the closed form, right? Because you never died. You always sort of like going in a loop, it's going forever. But then after the Chet of Adam Rishon, we had the open mem to represent that now we have death in the world. Right? So that's one change that represented in the shift of Sophie mem to middle mem. The second change, represented by the nun stands for nefila, is that people can now become victims of their circumstances. The Jewish people become victims of oppression, the whole notion that we're susceptible to damage and harm through elements of the world and people also changed after the Chet Adam Rishon. And that's the nun for nefila was sort of straight up, sort of a very strong, yashar, straight up nun, and then that changed to sort of the bent over type nun to represent that change. The third change after the Adam sinned was that evil was more prevalent in the world and that it was harder to distance yourself from evil, it was harder to become a tzaddik, and that's represented by the word by the tzadi changing from the tall, upright, strong tzadi to sort of the bent over, curved, open-faced tzadi that we have today. The fourth change that happened was that the physical faculties of man changed. Man became more physical. The pasuk talks about how man now has to work to produce his bread. And we become more like animals, and that's represented by the pei. Is that the pei means mouth, where we eat from, and so originally the pei was very upright, the Sophie type pei, which was straight. Man ate from a higher level. The Medrash says that the Malachim would even prepare man's food for him. It was a higher level entirely, but post the sin, the pei folds over, and that represents man's physical activity, pei for a peh, which is mouth. And then the fifth letter was kaf. So man now has to defend for himself. After he sins, things becomes much more harder for him. He has to, sweat of his brow. He has to work. He has to maintain himself. It's just harder to stay alive. That's kaf. That's hand. That's the word for hands in Hebrew. Palm. And the work of your hands. That before it was the upright kaf. It was easier. Now we have to work by the sweat of the brow. The hand folds in. The ability to earn a livelihood becomes harder for a person. So we went to now post Chet Adam Rishon. Now we have all these open-faced, folded-over letters on the lower level, lower madrig of the letter to represent these 5 changes that came into the world after Adam sinned. So now this is how the matzav of the world stays until we get to Matan Torah. So before Adam Rishon, we only had the final letters of those 5. Post Adam Rishon, we only had the open-faced middle type letters we think of, until we get to Matan Torah. So Matan Torah represents a time where our nation has the opportunity to get back to the state of Adam Rishon. Death in the world, right? The evil, it's easier to be a tzaddik. Evil is more distant. All these changes would go back to pre-Adam Harishon Matzav. And thus the 5 letters would come back into play. That we, for however many years, right, over many thousand years or whatever it was, from the Chet of Adam Harishon to Matan Torah, where we're using the open letters, so now everything would go back to the closed letters. And so the first luchos had the closed mem. The Gemara says, right, we had a nace, the luchos had the closed mem, because the first luchos had the closed mem now, because we were back to that original matzah before pre-Adam Chet Adam Harishon. We had the Sophie letters, and that's how we have the nace, that the mem stands miraculously. However, what happens? Moshe comes down with the first set of luchos. What does he see? After 40 days of being out there, he sees all of Klal Yisrael are dancing in circles around this golden calf, and this sin, so it's kind of like connected that Adam sinning with the tree. Now you have Klal Yisrael sinning again when it was supposed to go back how it was. Now you have this gigantic sin by the golden calf, and now we lose the ability for the world to go back to how it was supposed to be. And now we once again fall back to the matzav of post Chet Adam Rishon pre-Matan Torah, in which we again have the middle letters only, and the so the second set of luchos therefore did not have this miracle of the mem being suspended because we only had the middle letters. So so it turns out, so now we can start to answer our first question, is that it turns out, so really who was the only person who saw these Sophie letters? It was really only Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the only one that saw it because he had the first set of luchos. He saw them sitting, he throws the luchos down and breaks them. So he was really the only person who saw these closed letters. And maybe he told whatever, one or two people, maybe it was like a tradition that he passed on, but they never actually saw them. So it makes sense to us that the Jews forgot these letters because they never actually used them, they never actually saw them. Only really Moshe did with the first luchos. So that explains how it's possible that it could be forgotten. So now the question is, okay, so how did the letters come back? So now in post-Matan Torah, we only have open-faced letters. At what point in history does the Nevi'im say, okay, now let's get the closed letters back at the end of the word, and why are they doing that? So at a certain point, Nevuah in the world changed to focusing on, I guess, what's going on in the current state to what's going on in the future, to giving Nevuahs, giving prophecies on the Messiah, and on the redemption, and on the end of days. And once the Nevi'im started to talk about that and prophesize about that, they wanted to reintroduce this consciousness of these final letters to show how the world was meant to be. And so, but they couldn't say, let's only use the Sophie letters, because it would be a stira it would be a contradiction with how the current state of the world is. We're not at the Geula yet, so we can't just use the Sophie letters. So they said, let's use the Sophie letters at the end of the word, just to show that at the end of time, when we're redeemed to Geula at the Messianic times, this is how the world should be and will be, but as of right now, the beginning of the word, we're going to use the open-faced letters to show where we're at right now. And so they made that takana. And we can also answer the question of why they were called Sophim here, not Nevi'im, because Sofa has a connotation of scoping out and looking into the future, the seers. And so because we're talking here about a vision for the future and how it's going to be in the Geula, so they're called Sophim here because we're talking about the future and we're talking about the letters, the closed letters being at the end of the words representing how the world should be, these 5 changes, how the world should be at the time of the Geula. So that explains our second question. And this also explains a pasuk, an interesting pasuk that there is in Yeshaya, in Isaiah chapter 9, pasuk 6, which is the final verse in the reading of the Haftorah for Parshas Yisro, which is where we receive the Torah, is that there's a very interesting pasuk. The pasuk says here, anyone can open up Tanakh anywhere, Isaiah chapter 9, pasuk 6, last pasuk of the Haftorah for Parshas Yisro. The pasuk says, "Lemar be hamisre u'leshalom ein kates al kisei David," etc., etc., etc. Now, if you look at the word lemar be, the mem is in the middle of the word, so you would think it should be an open-faced mem. But the ksiv, if you actually look at how it's written, it's a Sophie letter mem in the middle of the word.
It's actually the beginning of the word. A lot of it's a prefix.
Right. But even so, it's still unnatural. You shouldn't have like the.
No, I'm saying even more. It's not.
Oh yeah, it's at the beginning of the word as opposed to, yeah, exactly. So to an untrained eye, you look at this pasuk, you get to it, you say, wait a minute. So we read it lamarva with an open-faced mem, but there's a closed mem in the middle of the word. It seems so strange, but really, based on what we've said, it makes perfect sense. Because this pasuk is a nevuah Isaiah is giving for the future, for what the Geula looks like. And it's talking about the exalted status and the unlimited peace of the future. And because the pasuk itself is referring to how the world will be when Geula comes, the ksiv of the pasuk is using the Sophie letter mem to indicate to us, to sort of a remez, to hint to us about how this is how the world should be in the future. It's sort of like a remez to how it will be one day, but not right now. So that explains the takana, that answers our questions, and just want to say that, does anyone have any questions on that? That makes sense? Yes?
So the first tablets were all closed letters?
Correct.
Okay. And the first Torah that was written had what?
The first Torah that was written, so, right, so that would be, yeah, that's a good question maybe for everybody, I don't know, like, when is it at some point?
When is it right? The first time that was written by Shemini after the second one.
Says he's still to right.
Right, it was all opens, then at some point I guess we changed writing the Sefer Torah to the closed ones. Like maybe when they made this takana, then they changed writing the Sefer Torah, and they started writing the Sefer Torah with the closed ones. I guess that is.
So the first Torah was all open.
Yeah. Yeah. Rabbi Brinson's expert on this, so he's awesome. Anyways, so basically, it's been an amazing 3 years here. I've been able to be zochet to learn yeshiva in Israel, and it's been a tremendous opportunity Hashem has given me. And that if you're all considering staying second year, third year, talk to me about it. And we should all take advantage of our. What? To stay third year? Too late for me to what?
Second, you did it already.
Right, yeah. Highly recommend. Yeah, and we have a big schus to be learning in yeshiva. We should really take advantage of the opportunity and our time here. And in the schus of our learning here in yeshiva, we should bring back only the Sophie letters and see the time very quickly where we only use Sophie letters to see the Geula, the Eskol, from Tzedek, and Herbe.